Outside Baphomet, 2064. Being a logistics officer was no fun. They had to plan out how many men and materials were needed, and if the soldiers were getting enough food. Krell was a Dracon logistics officer and found the task nightmarish. We moved around the siege camp taking notes of what the soldiers needed and what there was little of or too much of. He saw what remained of the troops from another failed assault on the fortress city. The city held somehow against all odds to his surprise. He had often argued about simply just waiting until the defenders starved out, but this idea was shot down way too often. Many in high command wanted some kind of glorious assault that would storm the fort. It seemed all these glorious assaults, however, failed to do much, and they had been stuck here for 1 human month already. These assaults cost many resources and made his job harder than it had to be. He walked up to the command center to hand over the data pad with the latest update he had made on what was needed to continue the siege before heading out for lunch. He was hungry after his work and believed he deserved to be treated to some nice food for once. The one thing, however, he was thankful for was not being near the front lines where people were ripped apart by the humans on a day-to-day basis. At least he wasn't an infantryman. Karbala 1, 2064. The grand heads of the Confederation gather around to discuss a new plan. Other than the current siege at Baphomet, there hadn't been much fighting. The humans had launched the occasional raid on their fleets to do some damage, but it hadn't done much to stop the war effort. The grand heads discussed the possibility of creating a new fleet that would beeline straight to Earth so they could destroy it, and hopefully that would cause the humans to surrender. But making the fleet out to thin air would take some time. So for now, the grand heads had to discuss how to break the defenses of Baphomet. The deployment of the Nexton race was tempting. The Nexton were a race of shapeshifters that could shapeshift into almost anything. The issue came in how to get a Nexton into Baphomet without making it look suspicious. Some thought they should attempt to airdrop Nexton into Baphomet, though that idea was shot down quickly. Some thought they should try to sneak in the Nextons in the next assault, though that was rather risky. However, if it succeeded, it could bring an end to the siege quicker. So the plan was given a go. Soon several Nexton soldiers would make their way towards Baphomet. Hopefully this would turn the tides. Baphomet, April 23rd, 2064. The walls were finally breached. The shield generator was sabotaged somehow. I have no goddamn idea how, but it happened. We got to get the civilians out of here, thinks Captain William Smith. He turns to his men. They are currently on a helicopter, heading to assist the 11th Company in holding the evacuation zone. The city is burning. People can be heard screaming down below. Fun shits echo out. Some civilians had even joined in the defense of the evacuation zone. Those brave motherfuckers, he thinks to himself, as he thinks about the civilians taking up arms to protect their wives and children. He begins to brief his men before they land. Our orders are to assist the defenders holding onto the evac site. The defenders of the evac site are down to 80% combat effectiveness. Make sure the evac site doesn't fall. Understood, he says. Sir, yes, sir, responded his men. Good, let's move, hey, he yells. The chopper lands, and he and his men rush out. Gunfire erupted from everywhere. The men were cut down left and right. One of his men with an L-11 anti-gun knocks out a spider tank as it rolls closer to the evac site. An explosion sends 2 of his men flying into a building. Shit, William yells. Contact at 3 o'clock. Take those motherfucker down, he barks at his men. The massive firefight begins with him and his men trying to hold the evac site for as long as they can. How long do we have to fucking hold until those civilians get out of this shithole, he radios to high command. Hold on for as long as you can. We got around 100,000 civilians out of the city already, and they have made it past the Confederation blockade. They should be heading to Neptune by now, responds General Walker. We need more fucking backup. The evacuation is going to slow. We need to get many more millions off this planet, he yells through the radio. I'm sorry our units are stretched too thin, trying to hold the rest of the city on your own over and out, responds Walker on the radio. Damn, says William under his breath. The firefight goes on for around an hour. Several civilians even jump in to assist in holding the evacuation zone. William then saw a flash in the sky. Get to fucking cover. They are orbitally bombarding the evac site, he yells at his men, before several massive explosions rock the area, killing hundreds of his men and civilians. He gets thrown into a wall, bruised and bloodied. He tries to pick himself up, but can't. You guys are still there, says a nervous General Walker on the radio. Enemy is about to breach the evac site. They will be here any second now. We are combat ineffective. William yells, okay, the radio. Then he pauses and a massive spider tank comes crashing into the evac site, mowing down everything in its path, and Confederation troops follow behind. He then yells on the radio again for one last time to General Walker. Enemy troops are inside the evac site. Repeat, enemy troops are inside the evac site. We've lost the city. No. Across the solar system, May 1st to June 12th, 2064. The news of the fall of Baffet was a slap in the face to the UN and showed them how little their chances of winning this war were. However, the UN's top generals had created a defensive plan focused around the two asteroid belts of our solar system. On the largest asteroids, there was at least one small fort. Along with that, the UN began to mine the two asteroid belts and worked on improving the fortress on the moons of Neptune, Uranus, Saturn, and Jupiter. They also tried to get as many warships out of shipping docks. The issues with spacecraft meant for war was how hard and expensive they were to make. It had only been 30 years since humanity had taken its first real leap into space and began to colonize Mars and the other planets of its solar system. Another thing on the UN's mind was whether or not the Free Planets Alliance would come to their aid. It was a possibility to many members of the UN, but others believed they were on their own. Now on the home front, the media to great effect painted Baphomet as a heroic last stand, and there were even movies about it coming. Life on Earth continued as normal as the war was far from them for now. However, on Neptune, things were different. Neptune had a population of just 15 million, making it slightly larger than Pluto's. With the fall of Pluto and Baphomet to many, it seemed only a matter of time before the first line of defense in the Iron Ring was broken. Several small evacuations had already begun on the planet. It was only a matter of time before Uranus followed suit. To the citizens of Neptune's luck, the UN fleet that had been moving into Pluto just before the siege of Baphomet forced them to change planes was now stationed in Neptune. This ensured that when the major evacuations did begin, it wouldn't be a chaotic mess, and they would have some protection if the Confederation fleet attacked during these evacuations. On Uranus, however, there were no evacuations. Like on Neptune, people lived in floating forts and cities. Uranus was the coldest planet in the solar system and had the smallest population of any planet. It had just 3 million people on it. Most of the people here were UN troops and industrial workers and dock workers who worked in brutal conditions to repair ships in the freezing weather and hostile winds. Most of the people in Uranus prepared to defend their floating cities and began to reinforce them in any way possible. Saturn, however, was a different story. By this point, civilians were having monthly evacuations drills, while many of the asteroids in Saturn's ring had small anti-ship batteries along with mines. Saturn was also the most populated of the gas giants, with a population of 200 million and a garrison of 12 million UN troops. Unlike in Uranus, most of the populations lived in Saturn's moons, the innermost moons to be exact. These moons were in between the outer and inner rings of Saturn and were heavily fortified, giving them a lot of protection. The defensive plan the UN had made for Jupiter was genius. While it had taken decades, a floating fortress city had been finally built in the big red spot, and if Jupiter came under attack, the people who hadn't evacuated and the garrison would hold out in this fort. The genius of the plan was that human ships were both built to withstand the hostile winds and navigate the big red spot, meaning any landing by the Confederation would be a costly mess. On Mars, there were no evacuation drills or preparation for a defense, as the people felt relatively safe and life would continue on as normal. Back at the UN headquarters, it was planned for several diplomats to be sent to the Free Planets Alliance to request aid. Sadly enough, the diplomats would not be led into Free Planets Alliance space. Humanity was on its own. Fast Hope, Free Planets Alliance Space, 2064. Sir, we have a ship full of human diplomats asking to be led into our space, said a naval officer on the ship, the FAS Hope, as he looked at the screen. Tell them to wait until we get orders to let them in by our superiors, responded the captain of the FAS Hope. The captain began to try to get in contact with the four-head liberators so they could tell him whether or not to let the human diplomats in. After some trouble, the captain got in contact with the head liberators. What is it, Captain? Asked Malak as his robotic eye glowed red. We have human diplomats wanting to be let in to meet you, responded the captain. Don't let them in. Those are your orders, responded Malak, before cutting comms with the FAS Hope. The captain, while rather confused at this short but stern answer, followed through with the orders. Contact the human ship, said the captain. On screen, a human with some kind of blue suit with a weird thing on this neck. The things humans called ties seemed to be what was on his neck. Are we allowed to pass through to meet the head liberators? Asked the human diplomat nervously. No, you are to turn your ship around and head back into your space, responded the captain calmly and sternly. Why? Asked the diplomat. Just following orders, now go, said the captain. The human diplomat begrudgingly agreed, and the ship turned around to leave. Thankful for there not being any conflict, the captain and his crew went back to their normal duties, or looking at the news to see updates on the Human Galactic Confederation War, ironically. Karbala 1, 2065. The Council had waited for 1 human year patiently for the creation of a new fleet, and it was here. 734 ships strong and carrying 1 billion soldiers. This was the fleet that would make a beeline straight for the human homeworld of Earth. They would also be assisted by the fleet that had taken Pluto, though that fleet would be tasked with clearing mines and forts in the Kuiper Belt, which is what the humans called the second asteroid belt in their system. This belt was defended heavily by anti-ship batteries and mines all around it and would be a pain to go through. A plan was made to try to get the fleet to inside attack the solar system from behind, but that would mean both going through Free Planets Alliance space and trying to avoid the solar flares of Earth's sun, which was too risky to do. The plan was for the Pluto fleet to clear out a path in the Kuiper Belt, and the new fleet code named Fleet Terra would head straight for Earth and avoid engaging the defensives on most planets, though taking Mars was allowed after a lengthy discussion as to how lightly it was defended. The Pluto fleet was to also stick with the Terra fleet until it went past the planet the humans called Jupiter. The Pluto fleet would then turn around to attack the planet. If the attack was successful, they would have cut the human forces in the outer areas of the solar system off from there in the inner. However, there was one planet the Council didn't even know existed, and also humans on it, Erexes. Erexes, July 5th, 2065. Erexes had remained hidden from the Galactic Confederation to its location being inside a nebula. This planet was hard to reach and hard to find, making it the safest location to be in during the war. This also meant news traveled slowly, and it had taken 3 months for the UN garrison, busy having fun with their alien allies, the Kanoa, to even know they were at war, and another 5 months to know about the mess at Baffet. The UN garrisons on the planet began to work on fortifying the areas of the planet they held in case the Confederation found them. They even offered their escaped vessels to the Kanoan to escape when the invasion of the planet came through. The Kanoans had grown too fond of the humans to leave their planet, and they had no intentions of also not defending their planet if the Galactic Council chose to attack. While some sense of paranoia crept around the planet, it was never enough for a full set of defenses to be made. Things felt relatively safe on the planet for now. Mars, August 10th, 2065. All hell had broken loose. Mika had been a worker at the docks and was now seeing flashes of light in the sky before they hit the ground and ripped people to shreds. Mars was under attack. He ran through the exploding streets, trying to get to his wife, begging to God she was alive. Ships began to land on the planet as creatures from God know where fired on the civilians and UN troops alike. One UN soldier began to hack the aliens to pieces with his machete. Another was firing away at the invaders with the machine gun mounted on an armored car. People were screaming. He ran past a guy with his intestine littered about the pavement. It seemed like the end of the world. He could hear the UN soldiers screaming, "Fuck you," to the alien invaders as they cut them down. An explosion sent debris flying his way and hit him on the head, causing a major gash. He dizzily tried to see where it had hit him as blood dripped down his head. He got himself up and ran towards his house, trying to see if his wife was still alive. His house was nothing but a pile of rubble when he got to it, and was littered with dead bodies of UN and the bodies of the invaders, suggesting a firefight had happened here. He tried to find his wife among the rubble, but it was in vain. He grabbed a gun off the UN soldiers and found a UN helmet and ammo vest and placed them on. He had no intention of running now that he had nothing to lose. He began to search for survivors, hoping to find someone to join him. Mars, August 11th, 1 a.m., 2065. Corporal Lawrence Green and his squad were desperately trying to find survivors in this hellhole. As they were coming under fire from all directions from the Confederation troops. "We are being killed out here. We need to get the fucking cover now," he yelled. "Artillery income," yelled his squad leader. Before an artillery shell landed in front of his squad, ripping the to shreds, he was thrown into several garbage bags, which broke his fall. Dazed, he picked himself up after he had blacked out for several seconds. "You better all not be fucking dead," he said to himself in much pain. He stumbled into the ruins of a building, searching for his buddies. "Where the fuck is everyone?" he yelled in the great pain. To his left, he heard contact. A squad of Confederation troops began to move in on his position. "Assholes," he yelled as he fired off a few shots at them. "He's a hostile, take him out," yelled the Confederation squad leader to his men, his tentacles turning red. "Oh, shut up, you shithead," Lawrence yelled as he fired away at the Confederation squad. "You got nothing. Give it up," yelled the alien squad leader. "Oh, I got ammo! Let's give this a shot!" yelled back Lawrence. Lawrence began to fire away like a man possessed and sprayed anything in his sight, forcing the Confederation squad to get to cover or get ripped to shreds. "They got balls, I'll give them that," he said to himself as he fired away at the squad. He chucked a grenade at the Confederation squad. "Grenade, Osh!" screamed one of the Confederation soldiers. The grenade landed perfectly and took out several of them. "You son of a bitch!" yelled one of the remaining Confederation soldiers as he fired away at Lawrence. "Sorry for killing your buddies," Lawrence said, as he mocked the Confederation soldiers as they began to push up to where he was. He fired off several more shots, killing another Confederation soldier. "I am not impressed, motherfucker," he taunted the Confederation soldiers. The scales and tentacles of the Confederate soldiers were turning red in pure anger as they fired suppressive fire to cover their buddies' advance as they inched their way up Lawrence. A Draken who was in the Confederation squad pulled out an L3 sweeper. "I got something for you," he yelled at Lawrence. He fired the sweeper and it caused a massive explosion, sending Lawrence flying back and into some more rubble. In great pain, Lawrence lifted himself up, picked up his gun, and fired away at them. "I'm still alive, you fucking amateurs," Lawrence yelled in fury at the Confederation soldiers. He fired away several more times before he was shot several times in his legs and stomach and collapsed on the ground. "Gah! Fuck!" he yelled in pain. A Confederation soldier who had 4 legs and had a disc-like head with several eyes walked up to him. "Take this, you son of a bitch," the Confederation soldier said, in the few words he knew in human, before crushing Lawrence's skull in with his legs. "All threats in this area are clear," said the squad leader before he and his remaining men continued their push deeper into Mars. "Serve your nations and families. Protect your wives and children." Underdirector to the UN troops at the outbreak of the Terran Confederation War. Earth, August 27th, October 11th, 2065. The fall of Mars had been a massive blow to the UN, and it had also cut Earth off from the rest of the solar system. Around 13 billion people had died on Mars. Venus and Mercury were never settled because of how hostile the conditions were. This left Earth on its own. The UN focused every resource and ship at its disposal to hold the moon. The moon had been turned into a fortress during the beginning of human expansion into the solar system, and the UN had spent years improving it. Along with the outer defenses, there were massive tunnels, bunkers, and shelters under the moon's surface. The moon also had several anti-ship batteries, along with the first long-range laser cannons, allowing the defenders to hit targets that got close to Earth. The moon was arguably one of the safer places to be in this war due to how many defenses it had. But it also meant that if the moon fell, so would Earth. Several civilians had already begun to evacuate to the moon, and in the greatest logistical feat of the time, 12 billion of Earth's total population of 27 billion were evacuated onto the moon. The UN also mustered 76 million of their personnel to defend the moon, along with enough food and water to last 20 years. Everything was going to be settled on the moon. This was the battle where humanity would stand as one or fall as one. North Korea even joined in giving up all their nukes and stock, along with their military, to help the UN defend the moon. Russia followed in suit, as did China. The strangest ally the UN found was in the Taliban, who decided to stand with the UN to protect humanity one last time. The UN also mustered a fleet of 53 warships to help in the defense. On October 9th, the first Confederation ships were spotted. On the 11th of October, the Confederation fleet of 754 ships engaged the 53 UN ships. The siege of the moon had begun. Confederation flagship Glory, 2065. It was a rather tragic sight. The Grand Head watched as the 53 enemy ships opposing his fleet gave all they had to stop his massive fleet. One of the human ships nearly rammed itself into his flagship, barely missing before it hit another ship, causing a massive explosion. The human fighter pilots greatly outclassed him and tore the Confederation fighters to shreds before being overwhelmed and taken out. One by one, the human ships went down. The human flagship fired off a hail of plasma bolts before its ammo compartment was hit, causing it to explode. The human fighters fired off strange arrows, like things that exploded on contact when they hit his ships. These arrow-like things ravaged his ships and did some serious damage, but never enough to take one down. The battle lasted longer than he would have wanted to, and it lasted for 3 hours before all UN ships were destroyed. The fleet had lost 37 ships and 234 starfighters, much to the anger of the Grand Head. While he had lost a small amount of his fleet, he had expended most of his fighters and their best pilots. and knew that the Grand Council would probably fire him for this. For now, he looks at the screens to analyze the defenses of Earth's moon. Earth's moon would obviously have a shield to protect it from bombardment. The tricky part was finding where the anti-ship's batteries were so the fighters could sweep in and destroy them, though he had few at his disposal due to the losses sustained during the engagement with the human fleet. Another further issue was he couldn't tell exactly how many defenders there were. The Grand Head had 1 billion men at his disposal, but was afraid the humans had way more men than he did. The Grand Head decided to wait for reinforcements and to simply bombard the moon until his backup came. The moon, December 12th, 2066. Sergeant Frost looked out the scope of his anti-ship gun, trying to see if he and his crew could get a lucky shot on one of the Confederation ships. "For one in our sights, load the shell and fire," he yelled down at his artillery crew. His artillery crew loaded the shell and fired it. It hit the side of a Confederation transport ship, causing it to explode into flames as the bodies of the dead Confederation soldiers drifted across space. He and his crew cheered this. It had been a while since he could get such a chance to land a shot at the Confederation ships. Most of the time, Confederation ships wouldn't dare to get close to the moon unless they were orbitally bombarding it. The siege had gone on for a year by now, and losses were minimal on both sides. Frost thought that the enemy was waiting for backup before they could try to launch a full-scale attack on the moon. So far, the shields had held well against the bombardment, and none of the batteries had been knocked out. So, to a degree, they were winning for now. The moon, March 11th, 2067. The first major assault on the moon began. A massive orbital bombardment smashed into the moon's shields, and landing craft braved anti-ship fire to land on the moon. Yet by some miracle, the shields held no matter how much they bashed away at it. It held the landing craft that managed to land were shredded to bits by incoming fire from the UN troops, and attempts to breach into the tunnels under the moon's surface failed. The first assault was a bloody mess, with 1 million Confederation soldiers dying in the fruitless assault. After the mess of the first assault, the Confederation would follow up with another 12 in the following year, but they all ended the same. The moon held for now. Karbala 1, 2072. The siege of the moon had gone on for 7 years, and the humans had held for longer than expected. Something had to be done. The Council spent several months arguing about how to break the siege and storm the moon. The suggestion of the development of robots of war was shot down due to how long it would take to mass-produce large amounts of them, and the fear that mass-producing robots of war would cause them to rebel in the future. Expanding the mech suit program was also an option, but that would be expensive and would cripple the economy that was barely holding itself together by this point. Someone suggested contaminating the water supply with parasites, but that was dangerous to both do, and the process of getting a parasite that was strong enough to take over a human was also an issue. Parasites like that would also pose a risk to the Confederation for it to give the signal for such an operation. Then came the suggestion of sneaking an EMP bomb into the moon to disable the shields that had protected it from orbital bombardment for so long. The EMP plan was given a go by the Council. The beginning of the end was here. Earth's moon, December 24th, 2072. Christmas was almost here. People gather in the streets to celebrate another Christmas on the moon. Millions upon millions of humans and Confederation soldiers had lost their lives in the siege, and the lack of fighting on Christmas Eve was poetic. Heavy fighting had taken place in the sewers against Confederation infiltrators. So far, other than the bloodbaths in the sewers and outer trenches, the tunnels and cities on the moon hadn't been breached, and the moon held. 3 billion people gathered for the speech of the head of the UN as he prepared to address the crowd. He readied himself and spoke. "Stars fall over our moon. The trenches and sewers flow red with blood. The invaders and their horrors lie beyond our protective shield. The living are lost, and the dead are nowhere to be seen. The Confederation freaks have convinced themselves that humanity is a sin, and we ought to be slaughtered. But we will live. The moon will stand. Humanity will live to see another day." He then paused and spoke again, "And the UN will make sure of that." The crowd sat in the silence and clapped one by one. Soon there were cheers as the head of the UN stepped off the podium. He went to meet General Samuel, who had something to discuss with him. He enters a bunker that is illuminated by one small light bulb. "So, why do you want me?" he asked. "We caught this fucker and his squad trying to sneak in. We wiped out his squad, but spared him since he is a high-ranking scientist for the Confederation. Maybe he'll tell us why the Confederation attacked us in the first place," Samuel said as I took a smoke. The Confederation scientist, a Burkhan, had most of his tentacles cut off to restrain him, and sat on a chair tied up. Security found no weapons or biohazards him, so I think we are safe to start the interrogation, said Samuel. Samuel sit in front of the Burke and Am asks, do you know where you are? Earth's moon, correct? Says the Burke scientist, shocking Samuel and the head of the UN with perfect English. That's right. Do you know why you're here? Says Samuel. You're going to interrogate me, I assume? The Birkin responded, unfazed. Correct. When we caught you and your squad on the moon, you were gunning down civilians. You killed women and children. Why? Asked Samuel. The Birkin did nothing but chuckle. In a quiet voice, the head of the UN said, Fucker. What's so funny, freak? Asked Samuel, disgusted. Nothing, it's just ironic that even if I told you everything, it wouldn't matter. Your species would just survive longer. You'd all still die, said the Birkin. What, said a confused head of the UN. Well, you're interrogating me like the info I'll give you will help you. But by this point, there's nothing you can do. No matter how many nukes and anti-ship shells you fire at our ships, they do nothing to our spacecraft. We learned our lessons during the early stages of the siege, and now our spacecraft have their shields up all the time, so your nukes do nothing. Your uranium gods can't save you. Your shield will only last so long. Granted, it lasted 7 years, which is impressive. But when it does crumble, it's over for you. You humans still act like you can save your dying race. Isn't that funny? Said the Birkin, chuckling. You've spoken enough nonsense. If I need to, I'll enhance the interrogation, threatens Samuel. The Birkin laughs and responds, Many people in your pathetic race are quite selfish, you know that. And what does this have to do with you? Asks the head of the UN. You wouldn't want to know, says the Birkin. What, tell us, said Samuel. Doubt you would like it. It would be mercy for me not to tell you, responds the Birkin. Just tell us, said an impatient Samuel. One of the security team that was supposed to check me never did. Say that again, said a hesitant Samuel. I told the security team that when we breach your little moon, they would be spared if they sabotaged the shield generator. They agreed to my offer, says the Birkin, smirking. The final blow to your race was by one of your own members. How ironic, said the Birkin, laughing. Then alarms began to blare. The shield was down. Without hesitation and enraged, Samuel puts 10 bullets into the Birkin. But it meant nothing. The shields were down, and all hell was going to be breaking loose soon. Somewhere on the moon, 2073. Sometimes I look down on the once beautiful streets of our moon. Sadly, it had to come to a simple end under the blaze of a Confederation orbital bombardment. I remember the parades and celebrations we had about having gone another year without the Galactic Confederation breaching the defenses. But I guess all good things have to come to an end. I met a Confederation soldier once, before everything went to shit. We got along fine, we even became friends. But humans and aliens can't stay friends forever, can they? I wonder what the Confederation troops are fighting for. It happened out of nowhere, and we were attacked by them. What was their reasoning for this mess? I guess we'll never know, since they seem to plan on wiping us out as a race. At least we bought Earth time to evacuate, Corporal Hicks thinks to himself, as he lies dying in one of the many tunnel systems on the moon. Confederation soldiers step on his limp body several times, assuming he was dead. One of the Confederation soldiers kneels down, takes a good look at his UN helmet, and takes it as a trophy of some kind. Wish I could stand up and kill that son of a bitch, or at least do something meaningful before I go, Hicks thinks to himself. He then slowly and painfully passes on to the next life after several hours. Somewhere on the moon, 2073. The Terrans fought like animals. They fought us every inch of the way. I remember one instance. I had bolted down a street and one swung at me with a knife. I blew his brains out with my plasma rifle. I searched through his body and found a signal photo. It seemed to be his wife and kids. The Terras like to bond with members of their own race for some reason. The only time anyone in my race would bond with someone of the opposite sex was for mating proposes and nothing else. It made me rather sad thinking how what humans call a wife would react to the news of his death. I wonder if this is what made them fight harder. We fought them because we were told that they had struck first, and how they had made a secret alliance with the Free Planets Alliance with our enemies. If that was true, where were they? Had they just left the humans to die, or was there no alliance? I wish I knew. All my friends have died. I'm truly alone on the Terran moon. I remember how happy we were when war was declared. The Confederation had always won wars, and the humans were less advanced than us. So this was supposed to be easy. Sure, we are winning as we always do, but it has taken us 10 cycles to get to break the organizations the Terrans call the UN. But billions have died to get to this point. I've accepted I'm most likely going to die here, either by me ending it myself or some Terran sniper getting a lucky shot. At least I'll be able to find peace in the next world I go to after my death. Journal of Barang, a Galactic Confederation soldier. Somewhere on the moon, 2073, the sounds of boots stepping on metal sounded through the hallways of one of the many tunnels under the moon's surface. A squad of UN soldiers enters a large room full of ammo and guns. Get the guns and move. It won't be long before the Confederation shithead release. There's a tunnel underneath their position. Barks Sergeant Rico as his squad grab as many weapons and anti-gear as possible. Squad Bravo, what is your status? Asks Rico on the radio. I repeat, we can't buy any more time to pull out of there. Now the Confederation troops are swarming our position. They're about to find the entrance to the tunnels. Get the fuck out of there now, replies a soldier from Bravo Squad on the radio. Shit, Rico says under his breath. All right, men, let's get out of here. If Bravo Squad is being overrun, we are about to be made. Let's go. He yells at his squad as they rapidly grab the last of the weapons and begin to move out of the weapons room. Then, several footsteps are heard from the tunnels opposite to them. Looks like they found us, thinks Rico. Looks like Bravo Squad wasn't bullshitting. This time they did find the entrance to the tunnels. My brothers in arms. I'm not a man for speeches, but you are the most dedicated soldier humanity could ever ask for in its time of need. We are soldiers of the UN. We fight and die to defend what we hold dear. Each of you has more willpower than any of those fuckers coming towards us. Remember your training and we will win this fight. To battle, yells Rico with as much passion as he can. To battle, reply the men under his command in a unifying roar. Load your guns, pick a tunnel to defend, and get ready, Rico barks. His soldiers do just that, and some, with the little time they have, throw something to barricade one of the hallways. Get ready, here they come, he yells as the footsteps get closer. Just then, the Confederation soldier begin to rush forward, and all hell breaks loose. Gunfire and laser fire erupts from all sides, as the UN soldiers of Rico's squad fire away like demons to throw back the assault. A laser shot hits one of the ammunition boxes, causing it to explode and engulf both sides, and a firestorm, burning several alive. Fall back to the weapons room. Fall back, yells Rico. As many members of his squad are cooked alive by the fire, what remains of Rico's squad begins to pull back to the weapons room. The disorientated Confederation soldiers soon reorganize and attack with a fury as it turns to melee. Spiked tentacles meeting combat knives and bayonets in the melee. Rico is thrown into a wall by a Draken soldier as the soldier's massive lizard-like body and strength outdid his own. Rico was only saved from death by one of his squad mates jumping on the Draken's back and stabbing its neck multiple times with a knife. The melee lasted for an hour or so, and the Confederation soldiers were driven back. After this, knowing they simply couldn't hold the tunnels and weapons room. Forever demolition charges were set up to blow the tunnels up. Rico's men got out of the tunnels and watched as the charges blew, sending dirt and rock flying everywhere, along with the Confederation soldier who had entered the tunnels to secure them. Humanity would live to see another day, it seemed. Earth's moon, January 4th, 2073. Captain Holt dashes around the many underground tunnels on the moon as he could hear the Confederation troops closing in on him. After the shields had been sabotaged by an unknown person, the defense collapsed as the Confederation troops swarmed in and butchered their way across the moon. The UN troops fought bravely to defend the civilians, but were overwhelmed after 7 days of fighting. Confederation troops slaughtered every man, woman, and child. Holt dashes into the transmissions room, which was now a blood-stained mess with dead UN and Confederation soldiers alike. As he could hear the Confederation troops just several hallways down, searching for him, he sent out humanity's last transmission. If anyone's hearing this, I repeat, the moon has fallen. The moon has been lost. This is humanity's last transmission. Goodbye forever, he said before sending the transmission across space. The Confederation troops entered the room shortly afterwards and killed him. The fall of the moon ended the leading effort of human resistance and marked the UN's last stand. The UN threw everything it had to defend the moon, but in the end, it was in vain. Earth would fall after a 1-month siege, and by 2075, only small outposts on Uranus and Neptune remained. The last planet fully under human control was Erex's, but they would get the news of the fall of the moon in 2076. The moon was humanity's last true hope of survival, and its fall ended that hope.